The day the river let me learn to tie a knot, I was 7, and the world smelled of tar and sun. The dock was a long slatted tongue of wood that stretched into the water, and every plank held a memory of rain and boat paint and smudged fingerprints from 100 summers. My father stood ankle deep in the current, his sleeves rolled above bony arms, and the rope dangled like a living snake between his hands. Behind us, the cottage sat with its whitewashed walls and a lilac hedge that trembled when the bees came home for the afternoon. The air tasted of sea salt and someone's something sweet, maybe peaches from the market, though this was inland enough that the memory itself feels braided with a village's small rituals and the city's distant hum. We had come to the river because there was nothing to hurry us that day, no bells, no clocks, no neighbours leaning over the fence to ask after someone's health. Just the sun and the warning heat that foretells a storm you won't see until it is already there. My mother kept the kettle warm on the stove back at the cottage and called us to wash hands and faces, as if cleanliness could hold back the day's bright mischief. But the river had a different plan for us. A plan that began with a simple, stubborn thread. The rope. "Watch," my father said, his voice low as a card deck being shuffled. He laid the two ends side by side. Plump with a stubborn wetness that clung to skin. You never rush a knot. You respect the line. You respect the water you mean to bind yourself to. He spoke slowly, the way you speak to a child who must learn to fear the wrong things less than the right ones. I, with my feet too big for the dock, and hands that trembled always just a fraction more than they should, watched his fingers move with a patient assurance that felt ancient to me even then. He showed me the square knot first, the kind that would hold a boat to a post and a promise to a memory. The rope paused between his fingers as he spoke, and I felt the rope's rough braid press against my aching curiosity, like a lullaby spoken in a language I was only half learning. Then came the practice, one end under, one end over, the coil of air that seemed at first to have no purpose, until suddenly it carried a weight, and then a future. Our breaths rose and fell, in unison with the tide that never quite changes. The water level lines on the posts. The way the sun leaned toward the day like a curious child leaning toward a secret. We built a small raft from planks found in a shed down the bank. Each plank a memory of other summers, other feet who had learned to walk, fall, and get back up again. The nails were red with rust and rumour. The rope creaked when we tightened it, a sound that made the river feel more like a person and less like a mere body of water. When it finally floated, pale and unsteady yet stubbornly alive, the raft looked back at us with the seriousness of a thing that could carry a life if it was treated gently enough. We pushed off, the current taking us with a polite insistence that you can only resist so far before you must bend. The shore slid away in a halo of heat and light. The air tasted of damp wood and sun-warmed tar. A dragonfly hovered, then settled on the edge of the raft as if it too wanted to witness whether this rough boy's hands and patient father's patience could indeed produce something that would hold. The lake lantern gleam of the river's surface, the way it caught the light in tiny, almost sacred motes, made everything look possible. Even the space between me and the far bank. Even the space between now and forever. We rowed a few yards before a small wave rose in honour of our audacity, tipping the raft just enough to spill a drop of water onto my knee and splash a cold, refreshing shock up my thigh. For a breathless moment, I thought we might sink, that the knot would fail, and I would be left stranded on a drifting plank with nothing but clouds and the heat and the sound of his voice receding into the distance. But the rope held. The knot held. My father's hands remained sure. His eyes kindly but fixed on what needed to be done next. He did not hurry us toward the horizon. He taught us to respect the water's measured pace, to follow its quiet logic, rather than to pretend we owned it. And then there came the slip, the raft's playful mischief, a tilt, a sudden laugh from my sister, a shove from my brother, and for a single, shimmering second, I felt the world tilt so far that the river might have finally decided to remember me as I had always lived. I slid from my seat, the world turning as if someone had turned a page too quickly, and I sank into the cool embrace of water you remember later as if it were carved into your bones. My lungs burned with shock and surprise, and for a heartbeat the river claimed me as its own. Then, hands, my father's, big and sure, reached beneath the surface, gathered me up, and set me back on the raft with a gentleness that felt almost sacramental. The breath came back in a long sigh, and somewhere deep inside me I learned what care looks like when you are the one who can save a life by simply not letting go. That night, after the river had settled and the cottage windows winked with the glow of a lamp, we ate bread and thick churned butter, the kind that sticks to your mouth and makes your tongue remember what it was meant to do. The air smelled of pine from the valley, of fish from the river's secret pocket, and of rain that might have begun somewhere far beyond the hill. We spoke in lowered voices, not out of fear but out of reverence, for a moment held too close to the heart to be spoken too loudly. My father spoke little after that, but when he did, his words carried the gravity of someone who knows a thing is learned and not merely known. He did not say that the knot would save us from every storm, only that it would keep faith with the moment if we kept faith with each other. That memory grew in me, not as a single bright lantern, but as a gentle harbour. Years later, when life pressed in with its own weather, the responsibilities of work, the ache of loss, the slow surrender of youth, I found the same quiet steadiness I had felt that day in the river. I learned to measure fear not by the loudness of its shout, but by the steadiness of its breath. To respond not with rashness, but with a careful, practical patience. When neighbours spoke of trouble, or when a child I cared for stood at the edge of something frightening, illness, a failed exam, a tremor of doubt, I remembered how the rope's fibres held together, remembered the way the water became a classroom, and every tremor of the raft's surface a lesson in balance. In the years since, I have wrapped my own hands around many ropes, the trade of a craftsman's work, the careful stitches of a grandmother's knitting, the fragile ties of a family that spans generations. I learned to pass along the craft not as a kit of steps, but as a philosophy. The world is not conquered by speed or bravado, but by a slow, respectful fidelity to what is in front of you. To tie a knot is to promise that you will not abandon your line, that you will give your full attention to the thing you are binding, be it a shoreline, a relationship, or a hope. Now, as I sit by a window that looks out at a different river, one that runs through my city, not my childhood, I still hear the old river's voice in the quiet places of the day, the rustle of dry leaves on the doorstep, the soft clink of a teacup, the way the rain taps the sill with a patient, persistent rhythm. It is a sound that teaches me to listen first, to wait for a sign before I move, to let the world tell me what it needs, rather than to force a plan onto it. I have become, in this way, a keeper of small crafts. The mending of a sock, the alignment of a picture on the wall, the accounting of who came through the door with a story to tell. Each act a small knot tied to a longer line, each line a continuation of some summer long ago. And yet the memory remains not merely as a trick of recollection, but as a living counsel. The river's lesson was not about weathering a storm, but about how to be present when the moment asks you to be patient. How to translate fear into a careful action, and then into a generous calm for others. It taught me that strength often arrives not as a loud triumph, but as a quiet, stubborn reliability, the kind you feel when you realize the world is held together by hands that know where the edge lies and choose to stand there, steadier for the sake of someone else. As I tell these stories to my own grandchildren on summer evenings, their small faces lit by a sunset that seems torn from a different decade, I see again the same mixture of astonishment and trust I offered my father on the riverbank so long ago. The knot that binds the raft was, in the end, a simple thing, a length of rope, a loop, a whisper of technique learned in a single afternoon. But its ripple is not small. It has become the architecture of my life, a reminder to breathe before I move, to listen before I decide, to care for what I am about to lift,